Thank you very much, Cameron, for handing the mic to me. I will take this opportunity to open the webinar, and we are live and having the privilege to be joined by well-versed speakers to talk to us about what AfCFTA is, what resources we might use, and the facilities that are put together by the African Union and through the after agreement. So at this point, we have the privilege of being joined by Mr. Gareth Blow. So I will give Gareth the opportunity to open the webinar officially and to introduce our speakers so that we can go into the conversation. Thank you so much, Gareth.
Liz Thomas, thank you so much, and greetings to all who are present. It is my distinct pleasure on the eve of an enormous program here in Toronto that the Chamber is running that is truly Pan-African to welcome each one of you to this program. There is no creating and delivering on the opportunities that we have before us without the legislative power and the true economic potential that comes from the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. But furthermore, in realizing the potential of that agreement beyond legislation and treaties, they're the people behind it, for whom it must be delivered and who must be a key part of that delivery. And so for young people, for women, for those who have often been marginalized in the process of economic development, I think that this leadership that you have shown and that each one of our panelists have shown is warmly welcomed, not only by those in Canada who stand ready to support the agreement, but most definitely by the Secretariat. His Excellency Wamkele Mene has personally given his most sincere thanks to all involved in advancing an agreement where Canada was a trusted third party in formulation of the text that now constitutes the world's biggest free trade agreement by number of countries participating. And with that, it is my distinct pleasure to hand back, of course, to our moderator and to say thank you very much and congratulations on behalf of the board and everyone at the Canada-Africa Chamber of Business for your immense leadership and for truly showing us that the future and what we have ahead is enormously exciting and certainly very, very positive. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much, Gareth, for taking that away and for opening our conversation. We have the privilege of being joined by Consul General Ms. Thandiwe Fandane. She will be speaking to us to inaugurate this conversation, but we can see there is technical issues at the moment. So what we'll do is go into the conversation of what AfCFTA is, to hand it then to Mr. Sebastian, as he works especially with the Secretariat in Ghana, Accra. Mr. Sebastian, please talk to us about AfCFTA. What is AfCFTA, and how can we benefit from it as young people and as women from the continent and on the continent?
Yeah, good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining us. And it's a wonderful privilege to be joined here by so many brothers and sisters to discuss Africa. It's very rare that I'm on a panel where the women outnumber the men 5-1, but I think this is a sign. This is a sign of things to come. I remember attending a certain secondary school in Ghana in the early 90s, and they said the founder of the school said, if you want to educate a person, teach a man, something like that. But if you want to educate a nation, you should teach a woman. And this school was one of the first co-educational institutions in Africa, and they had a big belief that boys and girls learning together was the future of Africa. This was a long, long time ago. School was established in 1927. So it's nice to know that I've finally been outvoted 4-1, which is good. I think effectively the way to think of AfCFTA, AfCFTA, Africa Continental Free Trade, is the path of least resistance to finally integrate Africa and to reverse hundreds of years of colonialization, neocolonization, slavery, everything that happened pretty much from 1492 up until now. In a certain sense, in the 60s, the African countries attempted a political integration, and it soon broke down because basically different countries were at different stages of political development. Some of the countries like Ghana, Guinea, Mali wanted to go very quickly and politically integrate, which basically meant you had one country with, one president and, that sort of thing, one parliament. There were others, that was a Casablanca group. Then there were others who wanted a more economic integration, like Ivory Coast and some of the other countries, and then the others were in between. So the long and short is that in the 60s, the founding fathers and mothers of Africa attempted to integrate this continent politically. Unfortunately, it failed because you basically were going to take countries that had just come out of a colonial experience. Some are speaking Portuguese, some are speaking English, some are speaking French. Apartheid was still very much ongoing at the time. How do you integrate such a continent? And so effectively 60 years later, the project has been relaunched. Now looking at the economic integration, because the idea is that if Cindy is in Marrakesh and I'm in Accra and Tandiwi is in Johannesburg and Beth is in Durban, we can actually exchange goods and services with each other without necessarily agreeing with each other politically or even knowing each other personally. And the idea would be that after a long period of time of economic integration, where people are willing to buy and sell products and services, maybe the next generation probably, or when we are in our 70s and our 80s, 30, 40, 50 years from now, you might be able to now have the political integration. So it is the same project, but with a different pathway. Previously, the idea was to have an ideological and political integration of the continent. That unfortunately failed, and the Cold War did not make it any easier. Now we are facing the same situation, but with a different pathway, an economic integration. And the hope is that if we can do this quickly, before probably the rise of China, which is going to dominate, and Asia, which is going to dominate the global economic space, perhaps Africa would be able to integrate. So in a certain sense, I think for us young people, it's important to realize that this is not just about trade. It's not just about selling widgets, selling shoes, selling services, selling hand-woven baskets. No, it is ultimately about how do we get, people who are in one part of the continent to get to know their brothers and sisters who are in a different part of the continent, and over time to build bonds of trust through business, through trade, through economic integration, and with that, be able to ultimately bring this continent together to become effectively the most significant economic actor on the global stage by the end of the century. So it's a very, very big project which requires a lot of young people with goodwill being guided by the older experienced brothers and sisters, and inspired by the legacy and the sacrifice of our ancestors to do what they attempted and started and didn't finish. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sebastian, for that. I have a quick question, just a quick follow-up, because we are looking at the Africa Free Continental Trade Agreement in the continent right now. And as our cultures are highly our cultures and the way we do business is highly dependent on knowing each other and fostering relationships. What are some of the tools that the secretariat or anyone that is working on the continent has put together to ensure that we are going to do business, we're going to trade, and we're going to do investment in a way that is African and in a way that young people appreciate, because there's a lot of development in the way we do business digitally and all that.
Well, I agree with you, Liz, that typically speaking, the best business is a business where you meet the person, you have a coffee, you have a lunch, you discuss the matter. However, in a certain sense, COVID has, in a certain sense, accelerated the digitization and leapfrogging of technology on the continent. I think without COVID, it would be much harder. I think now with COVID, almost everybody in the continent who goes to school or who is a school teacher or who is a business person understands that you can have a Zoom call, you can use WhatsApp video to have a conversation, at least the initial part of business interaction. Decades ago, that same thing would have happened over a coffee, over a tea, over a drink. So if tomorrow morning I want to do business with Liz, it is much, much easier, even among people who may not be highly educated, to understand that you pick the phone and you talk. I mean, I remember growing up in Ghana in the early 80s. There were definitely no cell phones. And if you wanted to make a phone call, you had to write your name in a book and go to the post office and stand there and wait for 1 week or come back a week later and make the phone call. Now, I mean, the cell phone penetration rates in almost every African country, even the poorest ones, is almost over 100%, which basically means that most people have a cell phone. It may not always be a smartphone, it may be a non-smartphone, but this has completely altered the velocity of speed, the velocity of change that people are used to. So I would say that yes, a decade ago or even 5 years ago, if you said to somebody in Rwanda who wanted to buy a product from somebody in, say, Nigeria, it would have been very difficult. How do I get to Nigeria? Ethiopian Airways has made that much easier. But now with COVID, that conversation can happen. And with all the different technologies, Google Translate and other similar technologies, people are able to, come together in a way that maybe in the past they didn't. So I am quite optimistic. I myself have had the great privilege of traveling in different African countries, dozens and dozens of them. Sometimes you go to a country, you don't really know anybody. And yet I have come to a very solid belief that the African, whether he's in Algeria or he's in Lesotho, whether he's in Mozambique or he's in Sierra Leone, fundamentally are the same people. I mean, they all care about the family, all care and respect their elders. They all have some belief in God or something beyond this world that guides them. They all respect generally their ancestors. So, and they all want the best for their families. They want more money and more services and more goods for their families. They may disagree on how to get there. But in my experience, I have never felt alone or felt lonely or felt rejected, no matter which African country I've gone to, and no matter even if I could speak the language or not. So I think that we have to break out of settled patterns of thought and move forward. And I think that technology is much like the sixth platform we're using today. Technology is a wonderful, wonderful tool. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Before you go, Anesu is here. Anesu does, sorry, I mean Amibeth. Amibeth is based in Accra. She has a business, a coffee business, coffee roasting business called Kalamoka. Now, if, from your experience, if you were to point out to one resource that Amibeth can take advantage of, what would that resource be?
I haven't drank her coffee, and I think offline I would send her a message and come and visit her shop when I'm next in Accra. I think it's let me say charity begins at home. Let me sort of, I'm a businessman, so let me sort of tune back and say charity begins at home. Before Annabeth is able to maybe sell her product to somebody in Burundi or to sell her product to somebody in Zambia, I think it will be very interesting for Annabeth to sell her product to people in Kumasi or people in Takoradi who are within the coverage area of her own country, who are using the same financial system, who are using over a 3-4 hour drive would get her to any one of these major cities. If she does 4.5 hours, she'll be back. She will be in Lome or she'll be in Abidjan. So I would say that this is not a joke. This Continental Free Trade Project is a generational project. It's a project that is going to take almost 100 years to do it properly. And the 100 years are at least 3 generations. So we have our generation, then our children, then our children's children. If you speak to the Europeans and you ask the Europeans, the European Union you see today of 2023, what was the genesis? They will tell you it happened with the steel and iron steel compact of the 1950s after the Second World War. So remember, after the Second World War, you had all those kids who were born after the Second World War, the baby boom generation. So from 1950 to 1980, that is 30 years, right? And then from 1980 to 2010, it's another 30 years, right? So you can imagine that it's taking the Europeans, who are a highly advanced society in terms of its economy, at least 60 years to get to where they are today. So if you think of where we are coming from, it's a long journey. So I would, if I sat with my dear sister, Amy Beth, I would encourage her to see what she's doing in Accra, how we can expand her business to Tema, we can expand her business to Akusumbo, we can expand it to Kumasi, to Takoradi, and then to Lome, and then to Abidjan. So I think we should think of this as concentric circles of development. Start from wherever you are and go to the next level of integration. And that will give you confidence, that will build capacity, that will give you revenues, that will give you credibility, that will give you the ability to interact beyond your borders. Because within the borders of your country, there's a whole host of experiences and potential opportunities. And so that's what I would say.
Thank you so much, Sebastian. I think at this moment, we will take it to Consul General. Consul General, thank you so much for joining us. We would love to hear a shout out from you. Consul General from South Africa.
Thank you very much to everybody on the platform, and my apologies for the glitches. As my fellow panelist has indicated here, it's going to take some time, especially from the baby boom generation to be up to scratch with everything. Program Director Gareth Bloom and members of the AfriVate Hub present, esteemed panelists, special greetings to you, Liz, the moderator, guests, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and good evening to those who are somewhere in the continent and elsewhere in the world. It is my honor to be part of this webinar during the International Women's Month, which is normally recognized on the 8th of March. I would also wish to salute those sung and unsung heroines who passed on and those who are still alive, who continued to push the boundaries and work on removing the glass ceilings deliberately put on women, for women to keep them out of the economic mainstream. I am equally honored to be sharing this platform with these esteemed panelists. You've already heard from Sebastian, and my apologies for now having to disrupt the flowing conversation. Let me take this opportunity to congratulate AfCFTA Hub Limited, a youth-led Canadian social enterprise and consultancy, for their vision and foresight in getting into this type of business they are in at this point in time in the history of the African continent. I must also applaud their partners, Canada Africa Chamber of Business, McGill MasterCard Foundation, Transition Projects, for believing in their vision. I must further congratulate them for coming up with this series of webinars. This one being the first one for today. As you have heard from Sebastian, and also have been hearing, that AfCFTA is an opportunity for young people to accelerate the anticipated Africa's industrialization and economic transformation. The AfCFTA agreement explicitly recognizes the importance of gender equality, as Article 3, subsection E specifies that AfCFTA aims to promote and attain sustainable and inclusive socio-economic development, gender equality, and structural transformation. It is also important to note that the theme of the AU this year, 2023, focuses on taking action in accelerating the implementation of AfCFTA. This is very much in line with your AfCFTA series key objective or key goals. Let me leave that for my esteemed panelists to engage on. The articulated goals of the AfCFTA series are as presented by AfCFTA led me to believe that they will be addressing some of the pertinent solutions in promoting women and youth participation in international trade, with specific focus on AfCFTA implementation. My message to you is that you have awoken the beast. There is no turning back. When women are empowered, we see that families thrive, communities are safer, and economies grow. Through the inclusion of more women in the economy, we can also stop the generational poverty and in the process stimulate economic growth. They say knowledge is power. You will be empowering the women and youth to take up their spaces in the table and invent new ways of sitting around those tables. Keep pushing the boundaries. You have the support you need in your partners and many others in this room and elsewhere, including myself. I will leave you with Tata Mandela's quote. I quote, "It always seems impossible until it's done." Close quote. Last but not least, let me leave you with my inspiration. I am inspired by women who paved the way and sacrificed for all for the benefit of others. We are here, we are where we are because of them. I'm inspired by young women who stand up and occupy their spaces in all spheres of life. The women who continue to shatter the glass ceilings deliberately put for them. I'm in awe of the rural women who under all the challenges they face are still and have the strength to wake up and do the best they can do for their families. I am inspired by women like you, Liz, sitting around this room, who do not sit on the sidelines and mourn, but do what they need to do to change the status quo. In closing, let us all make AfCFTA a reality and do what we have to do in our little corners. And I say, let's brighten the corners where we are, each one help one. Thank you. Asante sana, diabulel.
Karibu, I will say in Swahili to the Asante Sana. We really appreciate the conversation is inspirational. Thank you so much, Consul General of South Africa, Madam Tandiwe Fadane. I will take this conversation now that we are aware of what the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement is, we are always burdened by the lack of resources. Sometimes we actually have the resources, but we have no idea how to take advantage of them. Anesu Yamanya has worked in the field of international finance, and lack of capital is one of problems that is or issues that is highlighted 1,000 times by young people and women that are attempting business on the continent. Anesu, what resources are there? And from your understanding, how then can these resources be taken advantage now that the continental trade is here and we have Mr. Sebastian? How can we play around and hold his leg to take us into these rooms to access capital to move businesses?
All right. Well, thank you so much, Liz. And thank you for organizing this panel and for inviting me to be able to share some insights that I have from my experience. So I'm just going to, I made a PowerPoint presentation because I'm also a very visual person and I wanted to be able to share the resources. So I'm just going to quickly share my screen. Okay, let's see. Okay.
If you have that sent to Cameron, he should be able to pull it up.
Oh, so I can't share it here?
I don't know if it's shareable. Cameron.
And so you should be able to, at the bottom of your screen,
okay.
Select one of the options, start sharing screen, and then go from there.
Okay. Okay. Sounds good. Sorry, just quickly, my computer is asking me. I should have really done this in the technical. There we go. Okay, there we go.
I'm not sure if we can see screen.
No, you cannot see it?
No.
Oh, no. Okay. Okay, so I wanted to really, because I wanted to really show the how the different actors available and the different resources that are available. Is it okay if we jump into another speaker while I kind of figure out how to share my screen? Because I really, really want to share this.
Of course, I would also maybe advise to send it as we do that, send it to Cam. He could be able to help very quickly. So if you can send it to his email, he could be able to help very quickly with that. So with this rearrangement then, I want to give this opportunity then to Dr. Cindy. Dr. Cindy, you have worked on AfCFTA, and resources can be there, but sometimes if the skills, soft and hard skills are not there to take advantage of the resources, it is difficult. How can we do that?
I think I'm off mute now. Thank you so much, Liz, and good afternoon, good evening. I'm not sure if there's anyone who's in Asia. Good morning to them. And a warm welcome to each and every one of you to AfCFTA. Congratulations on the launch, and thank you for having us here. I'll observe all protocols. Consular Tandi Fadane, my sister and my fellow countrywoman and leader, it's so lovely to see you. And she did bring up that it's Women's Month. I had forgotten about that. So as Sebastian was saying, I guess we set the men up on a trap. And Liz, you put this up on Women's Month, and that's why there's 5 women and 2 guys on the webinar. So this is great. Thank you so much, Liz, for leading on us. But I guess for me, you jumped right into what are some of the resources that are available to women and youth when it comes to the AfCFTA. If you'd allow me to go back, I'm not going to sit on this for too long, but I think we also just need to look at the facts when we talk about women and youth in Africa in terms of what are some of the facts that we're dealing with today. And I think it's so befitting as well, considering that I am in Doha in Qatar for the least developed countries conference, the 5th one that is being hosted by the United Nations. And one of the key things that pushed me to want to be part of this conference is realization that 33 countries out of the 54 countries in Africa are actually considered least developed. So that's a major problem. And with bringing on the AfCFTA agreement, how is it really going to work, and can it be utilized by women and youth when we are talking of 33 of our countries being least developed? So which means we have a big job that needs to be done, not only from the policy side, not only from the high level side, but as well for those of us who should and need to take advantage of the agreement. We're also talking about Africa being the youngest continent, with over 70% of the population being young people. And we have over 700 million women, and the AfCFTA promises that it will uplift up to 1.3 billion people out of poverty. So when we look at that, it's very imperative for us to consider some of these facts and see how that can be utilized. We have to look at factors such as infrastructure. There has to be a commitment in human development, where as Africans, as people that are working with the AfCFTA Secretariat, as people that are interested in working with young people, to think from the high level going all the way down to the grassroots before we can even talk about how women and youth can use the AfCFTA. We cannot use it if there's no infrastructure that is set up. We cannot use it if there's no human development that is set up. So there has to be dialogue that has to happen from the top going all the way down to the bottom. There has to be education, because most people, those of us that are sitting in this webinar today, might have some sense of what the agreement is saying, as Sebastian has educated those of us who are, were born, past the baby boomer stage and so forth, on where exactly the agreement started. But if you go out there and you talk to an African young person who's 19 or is an entrepreneur or is a trader or is aspiring to do something, or for a woman that is a farmer, I work with 15,000 farmers in Malawi, and most of them have never heard of the AfCFTA agreement because maybe they don't have access to data. They don't have access to the internet. They've never seen anyone who's come to them from a high level place or from a national policy program to come and talk to them about how this agreement is going to propel them. But in that nutshell, really, the agreement is, as the Secretariat has laid it out, and Consular General Tandi said it as well, that it was intentional when the agreement was written, that it had a huge emphasis on women and youth, particularly because women and youth are also the highly marginalized in the continent. And so it will open up avenues if everything is done right, if there are dialogues, if education is put at the front of the table, if young people are brought to the spaces where it's not only national but also cross-regional dialogue is brought forward to the young people, to the women, on informing them on the opportunities that are being made available to them. If our governments invest in making sure that there's information sharing, if our governments invest in ensuring that the cross-border tariffs are reduced or they're eliminated. Sebastian also was speaking to Amy Beth about charity starting at home. So if, these are the conversations that we women and young people are able to have come over to us, then the agreement will definitely be a benefit to us as well. But we also need to ensure that we tackle the issue of unemployment when it comes to young people, because the agreement is not going to work when a huge population of the people that are to benefit from the agreement are unemployed. So, and women and youth often work together because these are the people as well that are in the informal sector, and the informal sector makes up 90% of people in Africa, and those are full of women. So really, if we take it all that and we wrap it up and we ask ourselves, we can sit down in webinars, we can write books, we can go into dialogue until we get into dialogue fatigue. But understanding the agreement from a perspective of, the end user of the agreement, the end benefit of the agreement, which is women and youth, how can we utilize it? We need to make sure that first we're all educated about the agreement, that that our governments invest in more policy sharing, our governments invest in actually putting money and investing into time to educate us about how this agreement is going to work for us. Sebastian also said that it took the EU over 100 years to get to where we are right now. We talk about the EU, we jump, we know what the EU does. So I really hope that for us, in our generation, the generation of our kids and our children's children, when they come to utilize the agreement, when they come to know of the agreement, we also would have had a chance to tap into the agreement to ensure that we also help we also uplift each other out of poverty. We don't have to wait to be uplifted out of poverty by anyone else. So women and youth can work together, should work together, and they are trying to work together in one way or the other right now through collaborative global partnerships, through mentorships, through intergenerational dialogues, through intergenerational co-leaderships. And those are the things that we need, I think, at the secretariat level as well, to ensure that we're not missing on any information that will be vital for us to be able to take advantage of this agreement. And more importantly, for us to be able to use the AfCFTA agreement. As I said, right here where I'm sitting in Doha, I'm hoping to go to that conference and really make noise about Africa, to say we cannot continue coming to these conferences, and our continent has 33 countries that are considered as least developed. So how can we propel ourselves if we continue being considered in that way? So what are some of the key measures that we can get out of this to ensure that when they talk about trade in these global conferences, the AfCFTA agreement is front row and left and center, but also it's not only just being spoken about, but they're putting it into action to ensure that it promotes Africa. It puts Africa at the front of the table to be a global change. And that's where really the promotion and uplifting of women and youth out of poverty is going to come from. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you very much, Dr. Cindy. That is really enlightening for sure. And I agree with everything. One thing, I went to School of Business, and one thing that I completely refused, and alluding to conversation from Consul General, was to sit on the side and wanting other people to solve our problems. We need to solve those problems. And for sure, what we are doing here and what everyone is doing on the continent, those who have taken the tools to work on the ground, like Amebeth, it is what is going to bring us to speed, to taking advantage of this in our generation, and in the other 3 generations. So thank you so much for that. And also, I believe your slides should be able to go out right now. Please bring us resources, because we want to have these conversations to avoid conference fatigue and talking fatigue. We want something that is practical. If we have Amebeth here and we are advising her to take advantage and expand into different cities on the continent, what can we give her? We can give her ourselves as resources that can help, but what else? And especially in terms of capital, how can she do that?
Okay, great. Thank you, Liz. And my apologies for not figuring out this screen sharing before. Thank you, Consul General, for your opening remarks. And thank you, Sebastian, for laying the land on what the AfCFTA is all about. And thank you, Dr. Cindy, for also highlighting the challenges that exist on the ground for, as you said, the last mile beneficiary or the end user of the free trade agreement. So from my contribution in this conversation really is going to focus on the financing aspect of it, of financing the trade agreement, because for me, I've been in the world of international trade from, capacity building, but also understanding international trade finance. And from my experience, like, trade finance is the lifeblood of trade. Without proper financing, it can be very difficult for businesses to be able to engage in cross-border businesses, because being an entrepreneur, and I'm sure Amy Beth can testify this, when you're trying to get your product or service cross-border, you have a lot of challenges. You don't necessarily always know your buyer. You don't always necessarily know the market. The other market uses a different currency. There's always like political or economic situations that happens in that market that can ultimately affect your profit margins if you're a business, etc. And so trade finance is really important because, and it's really important for youth and women-owned businesses to understand the different types of trade finance products that exist out there, because those products are designed to not only provide the working capital needed, but they're also designed to de-risk some of the risks that are associated with cross-border trade. And so really what I wanted to start doing was just kind of to provide an overview of trade finance, because there's a lot of financing that's really out there, from really large multilateral institutions to very like country-specific finance institutions. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to focus the financing available for youth and women-owned, especially micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. I mean, there's also financing for the large corporations, for governments, but that's a whole different conversation. But for this part, I'm just going to focus on micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises resources available. So I'm just going to start by providing an overview of the trade finance institutions and how they interact. So at really the top level, you have typically the multilateral finance institutions, and these are your usual suspects: the World Bank Group, which has the Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agency, which provides insurance to different types of large loans around the world. You have the International Finance Corporation. They also provide different types of financing as well. You also have the African Development Bank, the African Export-Import Bank, the African Trade Insurance Agencies, and these really are sort of the large ones. There are other ones, but these are the large ones, certainly active in the African continent. And so they don't do direct lending. They don't necessarily go to the micro and small, medium, sized enterprises and provide the loans. What they do is they will earmark certain amounts of money within their capital, and then they will work either with regional financial institutions, for example, the East and Southern Africa Trade and Development Bank, ECOWAS Bank for Investment and Development, or the Southern Africa Development Community, or other types of regional banks, and say, listen, we have earmarked, let's say, 50 million for micro and small, medium-sized enterprises. Let's work together, and they cascade that money down to those regional finance institutions. And those regional finance institutions, because they're in the region, so I'll take, for example, TDB, the East and Southern Africa Trade and Development Bank, and TDB will get that money, and they'll say, okay, well, we can't also, direct lend, because they are a bank that is that has 22 member countries, I think 22 and counting. And so they will work, then they will identify country-specific finance institutions within their own country, within their member state countries. And then they will work with those specific institutions, whether they're commercial banks or development banks or export credit agencies, to then try to and reach the micro and small, medium-sized enterprises. And I'll give a case study example later on to make this very specific. So if we go on to the next slide, so these are just an example of really active country-specific finance institutions that are typically designed by governments of those countries to provide support. And these are national development banks. And I think two of them here are export credit agencies. So for example, you have the Ghana Exim Bank. I don't know, Amy Beth, if you have had interactions with them. You have Development Bank of Nigeria in Nigeria, Development Bank of Zambia, Development Bank of Southern Africa, Uganda Development Bank. So these institutions exist to provide financing but also to provide advisory services as well. So let's say you're Beth, you're in Ghana, you've been doing great business and you want to take advantage of the AfCFTA, and you want to start exporting your coffee to South Africa, to the South African market, but you don't really know, they use a different currency, the South African rand. You're not really sure of the buyers. Should you go with, which supermarket chain should you go with? I mean, is it legitimate? Things like that. So you can go to Ghana Exim Bank, and they can help you with providing advisory services of, for example, list of legitimate businesses that, buyers that would be legitimate, and help you with that. And they can provide financing as well. So these institutions are designed really to help businesses, and their focus really, they typically do also have focus on micro and small and medium-sized enterprises programs that are designed to help businesses like that. So I'll just have a brief case study on the Development Bank of Rwanda. So here it's sort of like, it's an example. I shouldn't have called it a case study, but I wanted to kind of bring it home from the example that I shared earlier. So let's say you have the Eastern and Southern Africa Trade and Development Bank. They've earmarked $25 million of their capital to be deployed to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, because their mandate is to promote trade and development in the East and Southern African region. And so they identify, Rwanda is one of their member countries, and they say, okay, they go to Development Bank of Rwanda and say, okay, we're going to give you $2 million US, and we want you to deploy this to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises in Rwanda. And so what Development Bank of Rwanda will do is they will partner then with commercial banks, commercial finance institutions in Rwanda to then, because those commercial banks, they are the ones that interact with the clients on a day-to-day basis. And so this is how this is what this looks like in terms of how the trade finance is sort of connected. And then, so for example, Development Bank of Rwanda does have a program called Export Growth Fund, which looks to support export-oriented SMEs looking to for financing to grow their export products. And as you can see from their advertising, they partner with like Bank of Kigali, local commercial banks that the micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises know. These are like sort of the household banks that people say, okay, look, I'm looking for funding. They can go there and they can get funding that is earmarked specifically for micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. So I would say in terms of resources for entrepreneurs like Beth, it's always a good thing to go to commercial banks, because they would typically have, for the most part, if they're in partnership with either the development bank, or they can be a beneficiary of one of these programs where they get funding to deploy specifically to micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises. And then just one last resource that I want to share. It's not necessarily a finance resource, but the International Trade Center is a really invaluable source of information. They focus on capacity building, helping micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, especially women and youth businesses, in terms of equipping them with capacity building in terms of becoming export ready. So maybe you feel like you're ready to export your product, but you don't know the market that you should be targeting. You don't know how do you deal with the issue of different currencies. So they help with all those things. So if you go to the International Trade Center website, you can get a lot of information in terms of just even market intelligence information, just being like, okay, I'm curious what the Cameroonian market is like. You can go there and get that information for free. They also have a lot of webinars and information that can help small and medium-sized enterprises. So these are just the very, very brief resources I could share in our conversation today, but I'm happy to have further discussions. If anybody's interested, you can always email me or reach out to me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anesu. Very, very resourceful, very instrumental information that we will find useful as time goes by. Beth, we are here in the highlight spot to highlight yourself and to highlight Kalamoka and where you are at on the road of entrepreneurship and expanding into the cities that Kumasi, you are in Accra, it could go to Kumasi, Takoradi. I can recall this from my social studies in high school. I was bitten into understanding these. So please.
Thank you, Liz. I hope everybody can hear me.
I can hear you well and clear.
Awesome. So as Liz kindly introduced, my name is Amy Beth Kwanson. I'm based in Accra, Ghana, and I am the CEO and founder of Kawamoka, which is a coffee company that's based in Ghana. Before I highlight my business, I just want to say thank you to all the submissions so far. Highly educative, very inspiring, and as a growing business owner, it's definitely useful in the pathway to being a big business, right? And competing on the global landscape, especially the African landscape. So Kawamoka is very proud to be Ghana's largest specialty coffee roaster. And we were set up to do three main things. One, nobody knows that Ghana has coffee. I'm sure even Sebastian, who also went to my high school, didn't know that Ghana had coffee, because we've often been overshadowed by the wonderful cocoa that comes from our shores as well. But coffee is something that Ghana has, and Kawamoka was very enthusiastic and passionate about putting Ghana on the coffee map, to say, hey, Ghana has coffee, we have good coffee, and we want to share it with the world. So that's one of the reasons why Kawamoka was formed. We also wanted to do something that is generally missing on the continent, in that we didn't just want to discover coffee and ship out the raw material, but we wanted to have the value addition in country, so that, as Sebastian said, you can drink Kawamoka in Kumasi, or you can drink it in Tamale, or you can drink it in Ho, where I spend a lot of time as well. So then it becomes not just that you have the raw material, but we are actually drinking it. So local consumption was very important, and that value addition was very important for Kawamoka right from the start. And then finally, and probably very much in line with what AfCFTA wants to achieve in terms of youth engagement and gender involvement, we are passionate as a woman-led business. We are all passionate about including other women in the business, and this is everyone from the farmer group that we work with. So we have a community in a town called Leklebi, which is very close to the highest mountain in Ghana, which is in the Volta region, Afajato. So we work with a women led and dominated, like this conversation, farmer group who source our coffee. And the intent of that is to be able to give back to those who are actually, growing the coffee and doing the hardest, debatably the hardest, but the hardest work along the value chain. The coffee industry is worth over $200 billion, and the average coffee farmer in Ghana earns less than 3,000 cedis per annum. It doesn't correlate. So for us, it's very important that we start to find those consumption opportunities in Ghana and across the continent, and very much across the globe. If you look at who's consuming coffee generally, you'll find that the US is one of the big ones, importing $6.2 billion worth of coffee. There's also Germany that's doing about 3.5, and then Canada. But what I want to be seeing in the future is having, some of these statistics pointing to more African countries. Liz, you're from Kenya. In Kenya, your coffee culture has grown so much over the last few years. Ethiopia, which is a major coffee hub, has had, the indigenous saying, hey, we want to drink our own coffee. So for West Africa and other parts of Africa, we're looking for that revolution. I think one of the biggest surprises for a lot of people is that they come to Africa expecting to see, just poverty, and they see a lot of, nice cars, nice homes, tall buildings, and they're like, oh, okay. So there is money in Africa. And for small and growing businesses such as Kawamoka, access to that African market, access to that African expenditure is so critical in growth. And the AfCFTA is very critical in helping us get to that point. What happens when AfCFTA works is that Africans can now dictate what coffee should taste like. We have taste preferences that are based on what people are used to drink, but like our mocha recognizes that in West Africa we have great flavors. So for example, we infuse our coffee with ginger, we infuse our coffee with prekasa, which is a local spice, we infuse our coffee with dawa dawa and moringa, which is a superfood, because the idea is that for years and years we've had all these secret foods that Africans drink that the world is not used to. So how can we also imbibe that and share that wonder with other countries, and even within our own country, find people who are drinking that? So that's been very critical to us. And as a growing business, yes, the key things continue to be access to finance. What is interesting to us is that a big one is access to customers. So like I say, there are people in Africa, the people in Ghana who would like to drink our coffee. In Ghana, it's very simple. We throw it on a bus. There's a lot of packaging that goes. We have strategic partners that stock our coffee. And we're always excited, especially when it's women-led, to have women-led, African-led businesses that are stocking our coffee. So in Ghana, it's pretty available and it's been well received. But what if we can ship easily to Nigeria or to Kenya or even to Ethiopia? Hey, try some Ghana coffee. You have coffee, yes, but you don't have Ghana coffee. Can we exchange some knowledge? So one of our biggest impediments is just the cost of shipping. So wouldn't it be great if that movement of people and vehicles supported by AfCFTA could change that narrative? So you could, sit in Africa and still order your power mocha coffee all the time. So this is really exciting for us. The other thing is payments. We've seen PAPs, come online. How can somebody who's sitting in another country, even in our own country, be able to make payments for the goods that we're supplying? So for us, AfCFTA represents such a huge opportunity, and we're excited to see how it unfolds, not just for our generation, but for the next generations who will, again, like has been stated, benefit from the doors that have been opened now. We didn't see EU where it is 100 years ago. I want to see AfCFTA creating more markets for young businesses, creating more opportunities, and not having a struggle for finance as it's used to, as more and more opportunities become easier to leverage in the market. So that's a bit about Kawamoka and our passion also for AfCFTA. And I always encourage people, follow us on Instagram, go to our website, kawamoka.com. We've started shipping direct to the US. We want to see next an African country on there where you can order and we have it shipped to you at a reasonable price. So AfCFTA, over to you on that one.
Thank you very much, Annabeth. Very exciting, tying in the challenges and the opportunities and the excitement for this. David, you have done a film on, we have a technical issue, but David has done a film regarding the AfTA, and AfTA, as we keep saying it, is the Africa Continental Free Trade Area Agreement, and how we're going to take advantage of it. As I'm being conscious of time and our time, we have very interesting questions here. So if we can just snip away at few of your minutes, that will be really good. I want to give Anesu 1 minute to answer Dr. Zamura's question that many a times people have a gap. They are not, or they cannot access online, or they cannot access they cannot access the resources. They don't know even where to go. Like, how can they get there? How can they reach these people? If I can just like paraphrase what her question is.
All right. Yeah, I just saw the question when I went into the chat. I think that's a very good question. I can say that based on my experience, I think that there is a shift from how things have been done traditionally in finance. So if you look at development finance, 10, 20, 30 years ago, you'd have the World Bank, going into the country and like having this program, etc. But now what they're trying to do now is to go through these different financial institutions, because these ultimately to the commercial banks in the country, it's because then those banks are more close in contact with the last mile beneficiary, if you will. But I do still agree with you in what you're saying, that there is that gap because of the technological gap that is there in terms of like some people don't even have banking, etc. And so I think there is an opportunity there now that there's like this digital banking that's going on. But it's interesting that most of the time it's the telecommunication companies that are kind of facilitating that. So there is still that gap where those who do not have like digital access, especially in the rural areas, might be missing out from these types of programs. And I think that's where more, thought or innovation is kind of needed to see, okay, how can we then bridge that gap? Because the funding is there. And what I've just touched on today really is the tip of the iceberg, because there's now climate financing. How can you take advantage of that? That's also coming down. There's different types of financing that exist out there that could be of benefit. But definitely getting to the last mile beneficiary, especially small scale farmers in rural areas, remains one of the biggest challenge. And it's an opportunity for institutions like AfriVate to innovate and come up with ideas of how can we reach the last mile beneficiaries, particularly in the rural areas.
Completely agree, and I accept that challenge as AfriVate at this point. Sebastian, we have a question. Dr. Dolo was wondering, sometimes there is xenophobia on the continent. These are real challenges, okay? Young people antagonize each other. We see opportunities, we are in for the same opportunities. They're like, you're from Ghana, I am from Kenya, we are not working together, you're not coming into my environment. How can we solve this? Has AfCFTA looked at this, and how can we solve it?
It's how do I answer this question without sounding exasperated? I mean, the concept of Ghana, or the concept of Sierra Leone, or the concept of South Africa, the concept of Zimbabwe. I mean, these are some of the things that are by themselves products of 400 years of European interaction with Africa. Before the Europeans came, there were the Zulus, there were the Ashantis, there were the Anglos, there were the Fantis, there are different groups of people. So I almost never describe myself as a Ghanaian. I almost never do. I describe myself as an African, because Africa is something that we can say safely God created. But Ghana is an entity that tomorrow morning can be, adjoined to some other countries or split into 3 or 4 regions, etc. So I think these are, ideological problems that are the legacy of colonialism that have to be systematically broken down. And I subscribe and I believe that in an institutional framework, the treaty is attempting to do so with trade. The idea is that if Amy Beth is selling her coffee to a coffee connoisseur in Ethiopia, that is a relationship that begins to break down these boundaries. But I think that these borders themselves, and I have a huge Africa map, and as you can tell, my Africa map is a geographic map of Africa. I don't really like the political map of Africa very much, because these lines were drawn with rulers and with compasses by men, and mostly men actually. I don't think there were any women at the Berlin Conference of 1884 who basically had never been to Africa and just took a line, a ruler, and drew a map separating, the Bailey of northern South Africa from those in Zimbabwe, and separated the Evers in Togo from Ghana, and separated the Yoruba or the Kalabari, from Cameroon, I mean, it's a mess. And I think that any educated young African who really thinks that he can beat up his fellow African or insult them or make fun of them or ostracize them because they are from other African countries really needs to be ashamed of themselves. I think oftentimes when these things have occurred, it's because of the failure of public policy in specific African countries. So let me start with my own country, Ghana. If you are in Ghana and you have high unemployment and you have massive poverty in many parts of the country, then when somebody is selling a product in the Makola market and he sees a Nigerian attempting to sell that same product, that person gets very irritated and wants that quote-unquote Nigerian kicked out of Ghana. And the reverse is also true in Nigeria, that if you are in Nigeria and you're in a Asaba market and you also see somebody who is Cameroonian or Nigerian or Ghanaian or Beninois trying to sell in that market, you also feel, why don't we kick this person out? But the very concept of dividing and conquering, the very concept of pitting Africans against each other, North Africans against Southern Africans, Sub-Saharan Africans against North Africans, Ethiopians against Eritreans. This is madness. This is stupidity. This is absolute nonsense. And this is exactly the sort of things that we as young Africans have to vow, it has to be part of your DNA, that no matter the disagreements we can have, and we should have these disagreements, we should debate these things, we should have dialogues, we should avoid what I call another legacy of European colonialism is a duality, what in philosophy we call dialectical dialogue. Basically everything, if you've noticed in the West, everything is either left or right. Either you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. Either you are pro-life or pro-choice. Either you are pro-gay rights or anti-gay rights. Either you are pro-Ukraine or anti-Ukraine. Everything Western has philosophical underpinnings which are dialectical. The African is not a dialectical person. Fundamentally, the African is a much more textured person, a much more complicated person. A person where his aunt can be Muslim and his sister can be a Catholic and his father-in-law can be a traditionalist, and they all can sit at a dinner table and have dinner and there is no problem. This is impossible for, generally speaking, a European mind to appreciate how all of them can sit at a dinner table. And this is the communities that we have lived in for thousands of millennia. I mean, thousands and thousands of years. So we have to, in my judgment, reapprehend. We have to go back to find those foundations of culture where we are tolerant, not tolerant in a fake sort of way. I'm tolerating you because you are here, but deeply respectful. If you are from, South Sudan and you have a particular culture, and you meet your brother or sister from Northern Sudan or from Djibouti, you really respectfully consider what they are saying. You respectfully understand the differences in their thinking. And to me, when we begin to talk like this, so actually we are the problem. All of us on this call, we are more the problem because we have been overeducated in the West. Everything, every thesis we ever wrote, every book we ever wrote forced this dialectical kind of thinking on us. And most of us, till we left Africa, we really were very decent, normal people. But we've also become very agitated. We are also fighting all the different fights of, whether you live in France or you live in Europe or you live in America. I mean, all the fights there, we become extremely involved in it. And it is destroying us because the African has to be able to propose a different idea, completely different idea, that you can, be both. I don't want to be controversial, but I can give you 10 different formulations on this webinar, which are truly rational, but which is very hard for most people who are not Africans to understand. Let me give a controversial one. How, for instance, let me not do it. Almost all the examples I have are social examples, and I don't want to do it. But my point is that I think we really have to truly move beyond this oppositional kind of bifurcation, this dialectical sort of thing where we are pitted against each other. So either you are South African or you are African from the rest of Africa. Either you are, in this party or that party, and you see it affecting even our politics. We have an election and, we have two opposing sides. But think about it. Do you think that when, the great kings, can you imagine Mansa Musa's court, okay? Or can you imagine Shaka Zulu's court? And can you imagine them discussing the future of the Malian Empire? And they're having a dialectical conversation? I don't think so. They were having serious conversations about what to do for their people. And there will be debates, very big debates, where uncles and nephews and warriors and grills and philosophers and fetish priests and witch doctors, all of them will be discussing this matter in a very complicated way. But it would never break down into two sides. And unfortunately, this is destroying us. And I see it destroying so many political parties across Africa. And it is destroying us young people. So I refuse, personally, at my own personal level, I refuse to be part of it. I refuse to objectify. Africa is a complicated place. We are complex. If you take somebody from North Africa, from Marrakesh, and you compare him to somebody from Lesotho, they are very different people. There's pigmentation of their skin is different. The foods they eat are different, but they're African. Even within, and they're Africans who've been in Africa for thousands and thousands of years, such as the Khoisan in the San people in Botswana. Then there are Africans who came maybe 300 years ago. Then there are Africans who may be mixed race. There are Africans who may be white. There are Africans who may be brown. There are Africans who have different textures of hair. So this concept, this idea, which is a post-slavery kind of idea that an African has to look a certain way and has to behave a certain way, is nonsense. And I think that we have to, in our generation, begin, it's a very difficult job, but to begin to embrace the totality of the African experience. And if we do, and we are not afraid to be different, we are not afraid, and if we embrace it in that way, people who are gay Africans will feel comfortable in Africa. Those who are traditional Africans and call their ancestors will feel comfortable there. Those who are charismatic Africans and want to spend all day speaking in tongues will feel comfortable there. So my vision is one which is the original Africa, before the Europeans and everybody arrived, which was this complex melting pot of different people, different societies, tolerant people. And I think that till we begin to intentionally love each other, when Liz, and she's from a particular African country, or maybe it's not even her, maybe it's her dad or her mom or her grandma who was from a particular African country, I have to be intentional in understanding her story and seeing how I, as a brother, can help her and how she can help me without putting her into some box which she doesn't fit. Because think of almost all of us on this call. Most of us are going to have children who are going to be complex, even more complex than we are. Because maybe you are Zimbabwean and you are living in Toronto and you meet a man or a woman from Sierra Leone, and the two of you fall in love and you get married. And then you have a child who is Canadian by birth, but half Sierra Leonean, half Zambian. and then he also grows up, or she grows up and marries another African who grew up in Germany, who has two completely, so my point is that if we don't build a culture of tolerance, we don't build a culture that is wide enough to absorb the totality of the African experience, we would reduce ourselves to the point where we become irrelevant.
That's very true.
So that is, I'm sorry to give a long answer. I'm very sorry.
That's very true. I completely agree. We can see David is on with us here. David, we are glad that we can see you. And if you can unmute, please tell us what is happening on the ground.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to have my big brother, here on this call. and my big sister, Dr. Cindy, Your Excellency, everyone, Emmy, thank you very much for this privilege. Picking up where my big brother stopped, I also share the sentiment that we are now lacking tolerance. I started a project called The Rise, A Journey to Africa's Financial Independence. And that project is focused on the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area. As we know, there are a lot of aspirations that the African Union, provides. And we see that some of them are not properly implemented. So we decided that we are going to make a film that shows the progress. And our focus is on young people, youth and women. In my travels, I have noticed that the average African is tired. I dare to say that he's frustrated about the economic situation in their country.
Okay, we have technical issues with David there, but he was raising very important points. When he's back, we should be able to give him like 5 minutes to round up. But then Anesu,
can anybody hear me?
Okay, yes, we can hear you. He's back.
Okay, yeah. So it's a very beautiful idea, and everyone wants to jump on the boat. That's the first call. The number two thing is there is an issue of trust.
Yeah, unfortunately, technical issues. I keep calling Anesu, but I wanted to call Amibeth. Amibeth, there is a question for you. Are there any problems you are facing in terms? I'm trying to get the question. If you can see the question in the chat, I don't know where this has rushed to, but yeah, the question was ideally if there are any any problems you are facing in terms of weather or in terms of climate, rather, on the continent affecting your coffee business and that.
Yeah, thank you for the question, Victoria. I wouldn't call it a problem as such. I would say that. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. Can you hear? Yes, okay. We can hear you clear.
Yeah, I wouldn't call it a problem as such. I would say that over the years, there's been a traditional way of farming generally. So for our farmers, you find that a lot of them are smallholder farmers. So, 1 acre, 2 acres. One of our larger problems was more on access to land for some of our women farmers. So, those were the key issues we had to tackle when we got on the ground. And some of the interventions we put in place was by organizing the women into a cooperative, we were then able to secure land where they could communally farm, giving them, access to more opportunities to grow coffee. And then we also supported with some interventions such as helping them plant. So last year, in collaboration with an organization called One Tree Planted, we planted over 3,000 coffee trees. with 4 of our women farmers in the group. And like this went, and we had 60 volunteers who helped us do that. I mean, it was amazing for us that so many people even wanted to jump on board and come and grow and, you know, see the rural community. It was really transformational. So I would say that those are our key challenges. Data is always a problem, but, you know, traditionally you would know that rainy season is from this day, this period to this period, for example. Harvesting season is from this period to this period. So generally, the farmers are able to plan around those traditional dates. So even in terms of planting, we know when the first rains would come. We know where the latter rains will come. So we know when not to plant. So in terms of that sort of data, traditional methods have supported our ability to know when to do what. Climate change is showing its face. So you'll see that sometimes when you expect it to be raining, it's not. Last year and the year before, we had a bit of a drought, and then we had a longer rainy season. So where we expected that, you know, it would stop raining, it was still raining. We're also looking at potentially irrigation for our farmers. So things like solar irrigation. We roast with solar currently. So our roastery is 100% powered by solar. But all these things are taken into consideration when you're looking at the rural community. They know how to do these. The main data that they would perhaps request for at this time is more in relation to pricing. So wanting to know what is, you know, the market price for coffee at this time. Information such as processing methods in other countries where they've been growing coffee for a very long time. You'll find that processing has evolved such that they're trying new things: honey processing, dry processing, anaerobic. So how do we transfer that knowledge from one country that's been doing it for a longer period of time to another period of time, to another group of people, and undoubtedly data would really help us in doing this, but some of it we collect a lot manually. So we'll know for last year, based on the number of crops that we planted, how many survived, what were the challenges, how can we increase yield for our farmers. Luckily, the variety that we plant is generally resistant to climate, so this is very good for us. And we, by default, most farmers also farm organically. So our focus at this time in our coffee evolution is how to give the farmers better return on their investment. And some of it is manual data and not necessarily using technology for that. So I hope that answers your question, but there is like a traditional process that is generally followed in terms of times for activities at the moment.
Absolutely. The conversation is really nice. We would hope to have ran it for a day, but we can't. Dr. Zamora, you have worked on AfCFTA and you have been on the ground. Could you do us justice by highlighting what are some of the trends in terms of AfCFTA you have seen on the ground? You know, what's happening? How is the mood?
Sorry, I was muted there for a while. Certainly the mood has, I think Sebastian can attest to this, seeing how much she's involved within the Secretariat. I was first introduced to the Secretariat based on the work that I did at the AUC at that time, when I was working within the Youth Envoy's office as an advisor to former Youth Envoy Ms. Achebi. And basically my portfolio was on working with youth and the leaders in the continent as to how we could bridge the intergenerational dialogue gap. And at that time, as we were exiting the Youth Envoy's office in 2021, I understand Ms. Chebi also did some contribution to a report that was done by the Secretariat and UNDP on young people's involvement and what needs to be done basically from that perspective. The mood then to where the mood is now, since the agreement was launched in 2021, which is when we were exiting the Youth Envoy's office, when we were also working with the Women and Gender Directorate at the AUC, and also Miss Prudence and her team at the youth on the youth side. The mood then was very overwhelming for us, because for youth, at least for young people, there was a new office within the AUC. There were so many things that we were trying to deal with, and then came this agreement that we were very much interested in also understanding how it was going to propel young people out of poverty, how it was going to provide economic sustainability and so forth. So there were mixed feelings about that. Fast forward 3 years later, we now sort of like have a little bit of a more understanding, or a little bit more grounded, even in the continent, as I go around the people that I work with, or some of the partnerships that we're trying to establish. Whenever somebody finds out that we work with women that are either doing whatever type of work, or young people that are entrepreneurs, or women that are farmers, or whatever type of work that they're doing, the question is always asked, what is available for us in Africa in terms of how in Zimbabwe I can work with someone who's in Morocco? And then the topic of the AfCFTA comes up, and then it strikes a chord. And this happened personally to me when I traveled to Zimbabwe, and I happened to go to Beitbridge, which is the biggest border in the African continent. And whilst I was at Beitbridge, we struck a conversation with someone that I was standing there with, and we started talking about trade. So I think now the conversations are starting to shift, because there is this excitement where a lot of people in the continent are feeling like this is something huge that's come for Africa. And there's also the hope that this is not just going to be one of those things where it's the AU has brought something, such a huge initiative that's going to put Africa on the map, and then it just dies down on policy and on paper, and nothing is done. So I think it's the mood is good. I think the mood is growing, the mood is changing, and it's because of conversations like this that it's helping change the dynamics of how people are viewing the mood. But I hope it continues to grow. And thanks to the AU, they declared this year the year of the AfCFTA. So I believe that it's definitely going to continue pushing it up.
Absolutely. We are exactly on top of the hour. David, we'll give you 2 minutes to quickly highlight what is happening on the ground from your perspective, please, if your network can allow.
Thank you. I hope the network will allow me complete my thought. So one of the things that has given us hope as young people is what happened in the African Union ordinary session in Ethiopia. We had a youth meeting. First time, I don't know if it's done before, but this is the first time that I had dedicated to. And the topic on that session was trade, about how young take advantage of the AfCFTA. I am excited, and I have hopes, because the young people that I have met in my journey have an assurance that we are ready to make this work. Most people are putting aside, the personal sentiment of Nigerian, or you are Ghanaian, Ethiopian, you have to get that sentiment aside, because we have reached the crossroad. There's really no financial, there's really no way forward. When I mean no way forward, the economic situation of Africa is touching on everybody. And when you see a legal framework that allows you to be economically independent, you want to the general energy, of every young person continent that I have, spoken with personal level. But what I am worried about is not just a euphoria where we are just ginger. The things that we talked about, peaceful coexistence. That's one of the messages that I have full force. When I mean full force, I mean when trading starts happening across the different regions. I know that last year a shipload of goods moved from Kenya to Ghana when the AfCFTA Secretariat was practicalizing the guided trading need. But the big that I put for people is that I hope things happens in full scale. We are spill blood. that this would not lead destruction, but rather to building. So I want to reiterate what my big brother said. There's a need education, a way for reorientation, that we are one people. We are on this call. I see that there's South Africa on the call, there's Zimbabwe on the call, there's Ghanaian on the call, there's Nigerian on the call. My message really to young people, but I would say to you, Liz, across the different region, I have not been to Northern Africa during my push for the AfCFTA, but I've gone to other regions apart from Northern Africa. There is an energy in the young people to take their destiny. We are tired of being second fiddle in, and we really want to move to industrialization, so that tomorrow when we come on calls like this, we want to see the solutions that are used are generated in somewhere in Cambodia, So yes, the general energy across, and is that this would work because of the African Union and the heads of and the Secretariat. It shows that they are committed, and declaring this more, reassure us, and we are hoping that we'll have more engagement and see that this agreement is moved from paper.
You can reach out to AfriVate, and we will share any contact, or if you have any question, we will forward to the speakers. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining, and we welcome you to have to come along with AfriVate for the remaining series. Thank you very much. We are on top of the hour. Thank you, Six, for this.